Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Today's Friday, August 22nd, 2025, and John Bolton's house was raided by the FBI, Kash Patel's FBI, when Kash Patel posted a meme or something that said, "No one is above the law." So that's interesting, very Judge Dreddy, right? We'll see how things work out. Federal National Police in D.C. to clean up the country, going national everywhere. What about if a Biden figure takes control of that kind of power? So Donald Trump last night went out amongst the citizens with his National Guard and DC police. There hasn't been a murder in DC in 7 days, which is a record in modern history, I guess. That hasn't happened in forever, I suppose, which is pretty wild. I didn't know that. So there's all sorts of interesting things happening with this chess move. On one hand, I like the idea of being able to clean up the cities and stop the rot that is, I mean, like just look at the Lower East Side in Vancouver. There's all sorts of examples of horrible outcomes because of progressive policies. But when you apply these powers to somebody who's got progressive ideals, maybe the January Sixers are, they amp it up, right? And it's not just the January Sixers, it's other people who get, their beds tossed in the middle of the night or their houses, raided in the middle of the night by law enforcement because they posted something online. It's a very, very difficult razor's edge to walk. We'll see how this one plays out, right? I'm not sure. Carney speaks to Trump, accomplishes nothing, no changes, but I guess they had a phone call. And does it matter? No. If there was no difference in the tariffs or anything like that, Carney's a failure and he can't negotiate. And if you call somebody, you better have something to put on the table. If Carney was just like, "Hey, what's up?" And Trump said, what are you calling me for? And Carney was saying something like, "Well, we were just hoping you'd take off the tariffs." Well, what are you offering? And if the answer is silence, which I fear that it is, we don't have anything. So why make the phone call in the first place? Nothing to offer. Don't waste my time, click. So it's one of those things where I don't think that our leadership even really wants a deal. It seems like the call was made under duress, under pressure, right? So we'll see how, I don't know. It seems like Carney doesn't want a deal, and he wants the Canadian economy to falter, and he wants to be able to point at Trump and say, "See, it's Trump's fault that the Canadian economy is faltering," and really it's Carney's fault because he's not doing anything to counter it. Ontario towns and municipalities don't want to return to the office to work. I didn't even know. Doug Ford was putting pressure on the municipalities to return their workers to the office, and I guess they're all saying no. So that's the news article I've got to show you this morning. Also, glyphosate is not happening. Glyphosate spraying is not happening in Northern Ontario this year. It was supposed to happen on the 18th, but yesterday they announced that it didn't start on the 18th, and it's not happening this year, but only this year. Weird. Lindsay break-in, framing. Apparently, the guy who defended himself in the kitchen with a knife is the bad guy, and they're putting his name everywhere. But the guy who broke into that guy's house, no name of that guy. He's not anywhere, and we don't know what weapon he used. But the guy who got his house broken into used a knife. How dare he? It's all framing. It's very interesting. And man, this story's breaking my heart again, right? Don't go breaking my heart. The ostrich farms. We've got an ostrich farm update, and it's not a good one. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, ostrich farms. Drea Humphreys has an update for us. She says, breaking ostrich farm news. I've just been informed by the farm that after a month of deliberation, the Federal Court of Appeal has unanimously dismissed their case. What? A sad day for freedom in Carney's Canada. Interview on what's next coming soon at Save the Ostriches. Well, I can't believe there's not an underground railroad to get them directly to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Why haven't you been sending ostriches to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s farm? What are you doing? What's wrong with you people? There was an escape route. Robert Kennedy said he'd take them. Come on, everybody. Like you had a month. What's wrong with you? Dress up a couple of, I don't know, not even robots, like a mop and a bucket and things like that. Those are the ostriches, right? Oh yeah, the ostriches are here for sure. And send them away to another farm where the Canadian government can't get their greasy fingers on them. Wild, absolutely wild. They're going to kill these ostriches. The food professor says, breaking in British Columbia, an ostrich farm just lost its last court fight, even though most birds are healthy. Most? The test was a long time ago. They're going to kill those birds because of a test from a long time ago. Last year, November, right? Wow. Why? Like how heartless, right? Just heartless. Ottawa has ordered the entire flock culled after a bird flu outbreak. Policy versus compassion. Is this disease control or overkill? Yeah, it's overkill. Obviously, it's overkill. So that's pretty brutal that the Canadian government is doing that. Terry says, is it possible that judges in BC are paid off? Yes. Yes, it sure is. Absolutely, it sure is. I think our entire system is compromised from top to bottom. Here's another example of a terrible compromised system in Canada with regards to castle laws and keeping yourself safe. Donald Best says Lindsay home invader armed with a crossbow. Police hide the facts. Professional criminal Michael Breen was out on bail again when at 3:20 a.m. he broke into a home and found Jeremy McDonald fast asleep. Breen was armed with a crossbow, the kind you use to kill deer and moose. Breen had 2 or 3 other thugs with him. McDonald fought back in the kitchen and stabbed Breen with a knife. So the cops charged McDonald for defending himself. Disgusting. Our friend the Menzoid has the inside story as usual. So none of this is being reported by the mainstream, and it's a 20-minute long Rebel News video with the Menzoid. So that's good. Here's the mainstream media, CBC. This is what the CBC is talking about. They only have Jeremy. Oh, no, they did talk about Breen. Okay, so they tell you who the intruder is. I just thought it was funny that they're leading with McDonald and the knife, right? It's McDonald and the knife in the kitchen. Here we go.
About what happened, but we know now that according to police, the resident of that apartment, Jeremy McDonald, is accused of using a knife to attack the intruder and very nearly killing him. Do you
think if his name was more Middle Eastern or something to that effect, do you think that they would have led with that? This guy's the victim. He had somebody break into his home, and he's the first headline. He's the first name out of the announcer's mouth. Isn't that weird? Isn't that strange? That's so weird. And the way they're putting this, the way they're framing this, he had a knife. And then they say, we don't even know what the other guy was armed with. And I think they do. Take it all with a grain of salt. I don't know if Menzoid, I haven't watched the 20-minute Rebel video. I kind of scrubbed through it to see if there was a point where there was kind of a synopsis, but I didn't watch all of it. But I find it interesting where the CBC puts their attention, right? And thereby directs your attention.
The words that are in this court document, it says he committed an aggravated assault and did endanger the life of the man who allegedly broke into his residence in the Lindsay community in Kawartha Lakes early Monday morning. As you say, lots of discussion across Ontario about what happened here, what is self-defense and what is allowed. Jeremy McDonald, who is 44 years old, facing 2 charges, according to this information filed in court: aggravated assault and assault with a weapon, which we now know allegedly was a knife. I'm in touch with Jeremy McDonald's lawyer. We expect him to comment later today.
Okay, so lots to be watching for then, including, like you're saying, possible comments there. What more do we know about the alleged intruder, the other side of all of this?
He is also named in these documents Michael Kyle Breen. Police have in the little that they have said that they were on the lookout for Breen already. He's alleged to have been armed himself. Police and the court documents do not say what weapon he's alleged to have been carrying when he broke into this home early Monday morning. As I say, many unanswered questions.
But we have a lot of things known about the victim here with a knife in the kitchen, Unbelievable stuff. Here's Table Salt, and she says, breaking massive outrage at the Kawartha Lakes police for criminally charging a man who defended himself after finding an armed intruder in his home at 3 a.m. Doug Ford says something is broken here. Yeah, I think so. There's an interview with a citizen here. We'll just listen.
The Kawartha Lakes Police Service is facing public backlash for charging a homeowner with assault during a break and enter.
You got to do what you got to do to stop it. And, the police shouldn't be making rash decisions on whether to charge somebody or not.
Early Monday around 3:20 in the morning, officers say a 44-year-old homeowner in his Lindsay apartment was awoken by an intruder, a 41-year-old man. There was an altercation. The intruder was rushed to hospital with serious life-threatening injuries, then airlifted to Toronto for care. Police charged the homeowner with aggravated assault and assault with a weapon.
Straighten this out, because this is wrong. You should be able to take care of yourself if you can.
The intruder, who was also previously wanted by police, was also charged with possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose, along with break, enter, and theft. But the fact the homeowner is facing criminal consequences in the case has the Premier speaking out.
Something is broken. I know if someone breaks into my house or someone else's, you're going to fight for your life. This guy has a weapon. You're going to use any force you possibly can.
I showed you that yesterday. So, yeah, the fact that this guy had a weapon and other people, apparently, if there were other people, and that's according to Menzoid's report, that's absolutely wild. That is not a reason to charge somebody with aggravated assault. And I'm not sure, but would the charges against the aggravated assault be more potential jail time than the break and enter, et cetera, et cetera? These armed people broke into that guy's house, and now he's potentially facing more jail time than they are. Wild, absolutely incredible. It does not make me think that our justice system is above board. It makes me think that our justice system is weaponized against citizens, and people won't tolerate this for much longer. They didn't tolerate Lucy Connolly being put in jail. She's out now. She was supposed to be in for 3 years. She's out now. And so I think that there's something changing. I think that the powers that be are trying to get their censorship in place before we throw them out, because Keir Starmer's not very popular. Mark Carney hasn't done a damn thing yet. Nothing. And if he does something, I'm sure it will make things worse for Canada. It won't be making things better. Here's Danielle Smith on the break and enter and the person who, that whole situation from Lindsay, Ontario. Here we go.
Premier, I wanted to get your reaction to a incident, I believe, in Lindsay, Ontario, where a man is now facing criminal charges for defending himself from a home intruder. What are your thoughts on that situation?
Well, if you don't want to get shot or beaten up, don't break into people's houses. It's pretty straightforward. We had a similar incident in Alberta where somebody defended themselves, and they determined that there was not a reasonable likelihood of conviction, because we do expect that people are going to use a reasonable use of force to defend themselves and their families, and I support that.
Premier, I wanted to get...
Reasonable use of force. It's those kind of words. It sounds real good, right? But reasonable. What's reasonable? Who decides? The court after the charges and the court fees and the lawyer fees and everything like that? He shouldn't have been charged in the first place. Reasonable. Should be castle laws. Should be something on the books that says if you break into somebody's house, you might effing well die. Don't do it. And if you die, well, that's going to be your fault, not their fault, right? Pierre Poilievre weighs in on this. He says, your home, your family, your life. If someone breaks in, you deserve the right to defend your loved ones and your property, full stop. I'm pretty sure there are a whole bunch of people who are pushing back on this, saying the legislation was passed by all parties. You voted for this, sir. You voted for this, right? You can't now say, oh yeah, well, we shouldn't be doing this. You voted for this. Our legal system is a product of 20 years of Poilievre votes. Jeepers creepers. So there are concerning situations and politicians looking to take advantage of those concerning situations down every hallway, everywhere. Let's talk. Crime still. Ozzy is talking about the DC crime sweep. And Vivek Ramaswamy is saying DC's plan needs to go national, right? And Ozzy says they're trying to convince Republicans in the United States to go with the federal national police, something Republicans have been against for decades. Now imagine that police force in Clinton's or Gavin Newsom's hands, or worse, Rahm Emanuel. Of course, they use the plant Vivek Ramaswamy to push it. Yeah, I think that it's interesting. In Canada, Alberta is pushing to have their own local force replace the national one, right? The RCMP aren't doing the job. They don't have the resources. And if they did have the resources, well, they're recruiting from overseas, but so is the Alberta one. So what are you going to do? Ghana, you say, come on in. You could be a police officer in Alberta. Why not? So there's it's very, very interesting. And I feel like while I think what Trump is doing in Washington is not necessarily a bad thing, because the numbers bear out that it's much safer. What's the end game? This is the opening and mid game. What's the end game with that? Are you looking at nationalizing a National Guard? If you are looking at nationalizing a National Guard forever, then that's very different than activating the National Guard to clean up cities that need to be cleaned up. Now, if you activate the National Guard, clean up the city, and then turn off the National Guard and empower the police to do their job, so you get ahead of the criminals with the National Guard and then let the police kind of keep a lid on it, maybe that's fine, right? And the National Guard doesn't get disbanded, but gets dropped down to the level they were at before Trump called them up to Washington. No, I don't really see a problem with that. That tells the criminals clearly, you can't run the city. The government's going to run the city. And if the government can't run the city, the federal government's going to step in, make it so that the government can run the city again. And then that's that. Criminals aren't going to win. Criminals aren't going to run the city. Unless, of course, those criminals are in the governor's office, in which case, carry on, governor, right? Unfortunately, but in that configuration, not the governor part, but in that configuration, I could support it. But if you're always going to have the National Guard in play and you're always going to have this nationalization, troops, et cetera, across the country, then you've got a police state, and I don't support that. So, it's not even hard, really. Like, you can see what one side's pretty okay for a free democracy, for a country that has problems with crime because of freedom and blah, blah, blah. Problems with crime because people can come in and they can coalesce groups who target that use of free speech to then propagate their communist ideology, their Antifa nonsense. They pull down statues and they think they're invincible. They assault police officers. They assault ICE. That's the kind of lawlessness that you need to say, no, you can't do that. Yes, there's free speech. You can't plot a communist uprising in the middle of Washington, D.C. That's not going to happen, right? Like, so I think there's a definite difference between free speech and plotting the demise of the country on communist standards, right? Like, right? No, I think there's a case that could be made that this is a legitimate use, but also I can see why it's concerning. I hope that it goes the way of legitimacy. Fingers crossed, right? Let's talk about trade and the economy. The two are interlinked. And I mean, Trump's America is interlinked as well. We're all very, very tight. In fact, I pay attention because most people in Canada pay attention to the economy in the United States. I can tell you when the US dollar is strong. I can tell you when it's weaker. I can tell you when the Canadian dollar is strong and weak against the US dollar. I can't tell you how the Canadian's doing against the euro. And I don't think I've really paid much attention to that very much over the last, 10 years. I haven't, right? And like, maybe that's my failure. Maybe I should, but it doesn't really matter at this point in time. And so people are tied to the American economy in a way that is like you check the weather, right? But you don't check how's the Canadian dollar doing against the euro today. I don't know. Right? To be fair, I don't know how it's doing against the US dollar, but I'll probably come across that information at some point today. So it's interesting, whereas the euro, I won't. It's interesting that Carney is trying to make this case of pivoting to the EU when it doesn't make any financial sense. Really, I don't think it does. Here's CTV News. Also, our sanctions on Chinese EVs don't make sense in the face of losing our canola market. Scott Moe is heading out to China to try and fix this mess. And CTV News is reporting Saskatchewan Premier confirms trip to China to assist in canola tariff negotiations. So there you go. That's one heck of a trip, right? I have family that has been to China before, and they thought it was great. They said it was very smoggy. Like you get used to it. I've been to Atlantic City, and Atlantic City smells like a swamp because it is a swamp, I guess, but it smells like a swamp. You drive in, and I was like, "Buddy, did you fart?" And he's like, "I thought you farted, man." And because we were going to gamble at the casinos in Atlantic City, and there's a distinct, it doesn't smell like swamp, it doesn't smell like swamp, it doesn't smell like swamp. Holy cow, who farted, right? And like, it's pretty wild. And the family member who went to China said, like, as soon as you land and get off the plane, even when you land, the plane starts to smell kind of different, but you can't really put your finger on it. When you get out there, you get the full smell. And she's like, holy smoke. And yeah, it's one of those things where like the smog and the air quality back when she went was not good, right? So that's one heck of a trip. With everything swirling around, I don't know. I'd be like, could I zoom into that meeting? I'll zoom in. Do they have chocolate cereal there? Bradshaw says CBC must have had a mental glitch. The CBC journalist lost his or her mind because they couldn't remember Donald Trump's name. Is this the top journalism that Canadians are on the hook for? CBC News says Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke to his U.S. counterpart by phone. The U.S. counterpart, of Mark Carney? They have a prime minister over in the U.S. By phone on Thursday, the first time the leaders have spoken since the two sides failed to reach a deal on a trade agreement earlier this month. So, right. And Mark Carney didn't do anything about the trade disagreement until there wasn't enough time to do anything about it. And now there's been enough time to do something about it. But I fear this phone call, again, was under pressure and he didn't bring anything to the table, right? Nothing was brought to the table. And so he said, don't waste my time. This guy is destroying an American Democrat who thinks Canada is doing better than we are. This guy, what he's saying is 100% accurate. We got to kill the stream soon, but enjoy this guy's assessment of Canada first, because honestly, I don't think he's wrong. Here we go.
Canada can't figure out how to get like a house under $1 million. I don't give a what Canada says. They don't know what they're doing.
They're doing better than us in the economics department right now.
It's legitimately not true. They haven't had a growth in productivity in 4 years. That is unheard of in Western civilization. That is beyond factually incorrect. Economically, they're horrible. Economically, the median housing price in Canada is 4 times ours.
Their GDP has a growth for the last quarter. Our growth is going to be a reduction.
Well, let's see. We haven't had those numbers. Their housing prices are 4 times what ours are. They have a population of 40 million, but they had, wasn't it like immigration of 400,000 or something? And it pushes everyone's cost of living substantially higher, even economically.
If they have an immigration of 400,000, then they've got to have spaces for them to go.
Oh, guys, so that's how that works. Canada can't figure out how to get like...
Right, yeah, you'd think that, but there's nowhere for them to go. And it's actually not 400,000. It's 1.2 million, up to maybe 2 million, depending on if you count the illegals and count all the hotel rooms. Pierre Poilievre confirms that we don't have anywhere to put anybody. It's impossible to invite 1.2 million new people to Canada every year. He says when you're building 200,000 housing units, it's impossible. There's no room. Quebec is at its breaking point, said Poilievre in an interview in French. So, right. But this minority government doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Here's Raquel Dancho, and she's talking about the economy again. She says nearly 1 in 5 small businesses say they won't survive 6 months under tariffs. Under Mark Carney's leadership, Canada faces more tariffs than ever on steel, aluminum, softwood, autos, and agriculture. Businesses, families, and workers are paying the price. The federal government can act now, too. Repeal anti-development laws, cut taxes on work, energy, investment, and home building, and take back control of our economic future by developing a strategy that maintains sovereign control over our innovations. Conservatives stand ready to work with all parties to put Canada first and the tariffs and protect our sovereignty. I don't know if they're willing to work with all parties. They seem not to be willing to work with PPC, so that's weird. That's notable because they say they're willing to work with all parties, but they don't appear to be willing to work with all parties. But I find it interesting that we're so soft in the economic department. And really, there doesn't appear to be any kind of panic from anyone about anything. It's kind of concerning, right? Here's Martin and like there's all sorts of articles like this. National Post says from our partners on Finance Post haste, Canada suffering major capital drain as foreign investors go MIA. Why would anybody invest in a country like Canada at this point in time where the government can just seize your assets, right? And you're like, well, we'll be talking in just a minute about what the CRA changes mean. Oh, did I leave it in the other section? I did. I left it in the other section. We're going to be talking about CRA changes. And basically, the CRA has a lot of power now, and they're going to be getting more power to just basically tie you up legally forever if you have a successful business. They'll say you didn't pay your taxes or your expenses weren't legit and so on and so forth. Blender News does a good breakdown of it. But anyway, Martin says, economist says outflow of funds from Canadian economy since January is unprecedented. Yeah, pretty wild stuff that's happening. And again, nobody seems to be panicking. And that seems to be bad. Is it on purpose? I think it's on purpose. Is it incompetence? I don't think anybody could be that incompetent. If you started seeing all of the indicators that you were looking at that were formerly, hitting 9s and 10s and let's say it was hitting 9s and 10s in a 15 mark scale, and now it's hitting 7s and 8s or 6s and 7s, you would say, oh my gosh, there's a problem here, right? But instead of saying, oh my gosh, there's a problem here, they're saying perfect things are on track, and we're definitely destroying their ability to stay afloat. We're funneling all the money. More people are living on credit cards, and they're not being productive because they don't even know really how to be productive anymore. And so that's where we're at. We've offshored all the jobs. We're not making anything. We can't do anything. The best jobs are government paid jobs, and the government paid jobs, you sit around doing bullshit, racist nonsense all day. And so, like, we're in a bad way, and they damn well know it.